Hi everyone and welcome back to Venus Pages. Today we're actually talking about a hymn rather than a poem, but this is a hymn that John Donne wrote, so this is part of my Metaphysical Poets, the John Donne series. We're talking about the hymn to God, my God in my sickness. As usual, let's start with the summary and then move on to the line-by-line analysis. Because this is a hymn, essentially this is like a poem that could be written to song. Well, it is usually meant to be written to song to be performed in church. The kind of song that you perform in church tends to be a slow and reflective one, so it reflects on the Christian theology and the afterlife, and perhaps because this is a hymn, it is much more solemn and loving and serious. It's not quite the same atmosphere as some of John Donne's other holy sonnets, so it's not like, for example, Batter My Heart, that urge God to punish him, to make him anew, that are more challenging, more angry, more imperative. Rather, in this hymn, we see a speaker who is about to move into the afterlife, reflect on the life that he has led and on the straits and the suffering that he has endured, and how these feelings of pain are really necessary in order for him to move to the afterlife. Death is like our portal to heaven, and in this hymn the idea is to comfort anyone who's nearing that last final stretch in their life and to tell them that this is normal, that Christ went through the suffering too, and that this suffering was necessary in order to prepare you for this new part of your life. And a little on the autobiographical note, one of John Donne's close friends was Isaac Walton, who wrote The Compleat Angler, one of the kind of early ecologists. It was a book about fishing and the environment and nature, but he actually said that John Donne wrote this hymn about 8 days before he died, so perhaps on a personal note, John Donne could also feel his demise, so this was a hymn meant to comfort not only those who would listen to it in church, but actually himself too. And in fact, we don't really know that it was meant to be ever performed because he wrote this in a sort of private setting, right? So perhaps this was just something he wrote to comfort himself. The rhyme is A, B, A, B, B, and it ends with a rhyming couplet, so you have a sense of completion in each stanza, and it also seems like the speaker is moving to heaven after all, so perhaps he's managed to repent for his sins and feel in his last moments that he has atoned for his wrongdoings. And also the meter is iambic pentameter, so it adds a sort of rhythmical and methodical reflection to the hymn. But alright, let's get into the analysis. Since I am coming to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints for evermore, I shall be made thy music, as I come, I tune the instrument here at the door, and what I must do then, think here before. Since I am coming to the holy room, so the holy room is likely heaven, so since I'm approaching my afterlife, where you are with your choir of saints, this is addressed to God, right? Thy is directly addressed to God because I'm coming to your room. So it's not necessarily saying your holy room, but that holy room where it's your choir of saints. So everything is yours, but particularly that choir of saints. For eternity, I shall be made thy music. So there's a certainty that he will join God here. Since I am coming, because I am coming. It's not really if I come, but it's when I come, when I join your choir, when I come into your domain, I shall. And so we have this modal verb, I shall be made thy music. So he's confident that he will be a part of God's musical performance, the holy choir, and he's reflecting now on what he has to do there. So he tunes the instrument here at the door, he prepares to be made a part of God's holy music. And when we say the instrument, he's saying that he's tuning himself. So he's praying, he's reflecting, he's meditating, he's preparing for this new journey to the afterlife that awaits him. He thinks about what he must do before he's being made into a part of God's choir. Because it's a holy choir, he must be worthwhile to join God. Is developing on this idea of him being a part of the song and this all being almost one tune, so we all move to God's words and God's rhythm is the idea here. And this idea of tuning as well, that we all need to prepare mentally, physically, spiritually. So mentally and spiritually as well, in particular, perhaps because he's a poet. So he's practicing his skill in poetry almost by writing this poem. It's quite meta, putting the meta into metaphysical. As in, I tune the instrument here at the door, so before I proceed, before I cross this portal, cross this threshold into the afterlife, I practice, and I don't just practice by purifying myself, but I think here, so I'm expressing my thoughts in this poem. Oh, and of course not just reflecting, but putting his thoughts into words to address God, to kind of tell him that, hey, I'm preparing, I'm ready for this afterlife. Whilst my physicians by their love are grown, cosmographers, and I their map, who lie flat on this bed, that by them may be shown, that this is my southwest discovery, per fretum febris, by these straits to die. So the next idea that we have here is that of his doctors, his physicians. By their love, by their care, they turn cosmographers, so map makers of the sky, of the cosmos, raphers, right, from making a map, and cosmos from the sky, from space, of the world, and I am their map, who lies flat on their bed. It could be here that he's actually using cosmographer more in the sense of geographer. So the conceit here is that John Donne is like the map, and he's lying flat out on the bed the same way that you roll a map out onto the table, and he's letting these physicians explore his body. And he's also saying, this is my southwest discovery, and the south is usually associated with heat, and well, in Donne's days, it would be associated with the heat, right? And in general, the southern part of the world is a warmer part of the world, but the west with the setting sun. So he's saying that he's somewhere between the heat and somewhere between the setting sun, and the setting sun is usually signifies the end of the day, or here the end of the life. So perhaps it's saying that he has a fever, that his death will likely be, that his decline of the sun, as his life was this holy shining sun, and then it's declining now, so it's nearing to its end, the end of the lifetime, the end of a day. It's somewhere in between that and also the heat and the fever. So death by fever, perhaps. Fretum febris, by the fretting of fever. So by the tossing, by the turning of it, by the heat that shakes me, by these traits to die. So by these sufferings of fever, I shall die. So now he's specifically saying what will bring his death about, and it's almost like he's going into the future and he's saying, well, I think that I will be dying by fever, and I think this because in my mind I see these image of me laid out on the bed, and doctors coming in to establish the cause of death, and seeing me here and exploring my body and determining that it's per fretum febris, that I had an uneasy passageway into the afterworld. And perhaps as well, it's significant that he's chosen fear. Maybe that it doesn't mean that he has died because of fever, but maybe he means that in his final moments there was fever. So you see the difference between fever being the cause of death and there being fever in his final moments. So maybe there is fever in his final moments because he's had this difficult journey of crossing through to heaven. Perhaps this idea of purgatory as this middle ground, perhaps that he's saying that it was an uneasy passage, that he was tossing and turning, but then now finally he's moved through purgatory and he's moved to this afterlife. I joy that in these straits I see my west, for though their currents yield return to none, what shall my west hurt me, as west and east in all flat maps, and I am one, are one, so death does touch the resurrection. I joy that in these straits, so in this passage, in the suffering, joy as in rejoice, turning the noun into a verb, he sees my west, he sees death in these sufferings. So in this narrow passage between these two land masses, right, between this strait, this narrow passage between the south and between the west, even though their currents and their passages don't really let anyone go back the other way around. So what he's saying is, once I've crossed it, that's it, I know I can't come back. What shall my west hurt me? Why should I be hurt and upset by my death, by my passage through this strait? So why should I be, and again, west as the idea of the declining sun, so why should I be hurt that I've joined the west, that my sun has set? We get a rhetorical question here that ends in the middle of the line, so what shall my west hurt me? We have a moment of pause with the caesura, west and east, and in all flat maps another caesura with I am one. So that conceit of him and the map as one. Before we had that conceit that he was the map because he was laid out like the map. Now he's just the map because he's showing that passage from the south to the west. Interestingly, he's saying that it's a flat map because if you lay the globe out, right, in a flat map the west and the east don't touch, but if you make it into a globe, suddenly they touch. So he's actually saying that even though I won't return in this world, he's actually saying that life and death, it's one big circle. So it makes sense for me to move into this because I will be born anew, but this time in heaven. So I will be moving to a new stage in my life, even though I have died in this one. We view usually the west and the east as two separate poles because on our map, on a flat map, they're like that. But actually the globe is circular, so they would meet. So in other words, he's saying that don't strike it off. Don't think that this is where it ends. Is the Pacific Sea my home? Or are the eastern riches? Is Jerusalem, Anion and Magellan and Gibraltar, all straits and none but straits are ways to them, whether where Japhet dwelled or Cham or Shem? So the next stanza centers on where we're going, on answering, reflecting on the uncertainty of the obvious question that comes to us all when we near that stage in our life. What comes next? He asks, is the Pacific Sea my home, or are the eastern reaches? So again, we have that continuation of the idea of him as a map, and he's asking where his home is. So if he picks any place on the map, is it in the middle of the Pacific Sea? Is it somewhere in the rich east? Is it Anyan? It was believed to be a strait between America and Asia. Is it Magellan or Magellan, the strait in southern Chile? Or is it Gibraltar, the strait between Spain and Africa? So all are straits. Nothing but straits are ways to them. So that passage between the worlds, everything is actually a passage if you think about it. So he's saying no matter where my home is, no matter which passage I have chosen. After the flood, Noah was meant to divide the world between the three, so Jaffa, Cham, Shem. So he's saying that everything is ultimately that divide, that strait, which leads to one of the three sons, or from one thing to the next. So likewise, any path of life ultimately leads to another path in life, the path that will go through God, the afterlife. We think that paradise and Calvary, Christ's cross and Adam's tree, stood in one place. Look, Lord, and find both Adams met in me. As the first Adam's sweat surrounds my face, may the last Adam's blood my soul embrace. So this is according to the teachings of St. Paul, that some people thought that the crucifixion actually took place in what was the Garden of Eden. So Calvary is the place just outside Jerusalem where Christ was crucified, and according to the teachings, Adam's tree and the Garden of Eden were actually in one place. So the last Adam's sweat is the blood on the cross. Look, Lord, and find both Adams and me. The original man and the sinner and the higher man who sacrificed everything. Just like how the first Adam's sweat surrounds my face, may his last blood, so the death of Jesus, embrace my soul. So although I'm physically here, although my body is physically here, let my soul to heaven go. It's also that idea of, as I sweat like Adam in my illness and suffering, let the blood and pain of Jesus embrace me and give me the strength to ascend. And we also have a very completed rhyme here, and so the fact that the stanza of the hymn is so complete here with the rhyme face embrace shows that it's that sense of completion as he moves on to the final stanza, and also to the final point that he's making, that he's moving closer to God. So this was a little bit complicated, but in other words, he's saying like, both Adams and me, both the sinner and the higher man. So let me leave my physical body, let me leave that part of me that's just a normal mortal man behind, and let me go and be closer to Jesus and to God. So in his purple wrapped, receive me, Lord. By these his thorns, give me his other crown. And as to other souls I preach thy word. Be this my text, my sermon to mine own. Therefore that he may raise, the Lord throws down. So we then get this trochee, this emphasis, feels like it's on the conjunction. So in his purple, so in his, this trochee, right? In his purple wrapped. Admit me to heaven while I am wrapped in purple. Receive me, Lord, in the purple that is the blood of Adam that we mentioned in the previous stanza. And the other interpretation that it could be is the slightly less gory interpretation, that it's not actually the blood of Adam, but it's, according to Matthews, the soldiers mocked Christ by draping him in purple, which was the royal colors. So wrapped in purple. So I'm like Adam, I'm like Christ, both are in me, right? So wrapped in purple, because I'm representing that. They also put the crown of thorns on his head, right? So royal, almost this royal image. And by these thorns, he says here, by these his thorns, give me his other crown. So by the sufferings, by Christ's spike, give me the crown, and as to other souls I preach thy word. So as I preached to other people, because I am a preacher, as I preached your message, as I preached my devotion, give me my own text, give me my own sermon. Let this be my text. Therefore that he may raise, the Lord throws down. So please let that be kind of how I'm preached, how I'm remembered, the same way that I preach to others. That's so that he may raise, so he being the Lord, so that the Lord may raise, the Lord throws down. In order to build people up, the Lord throws down, right? So in order to build us up, he has to knock us down. So this is what he views death as being. In order to rise up, we need to be knocked down first. So in order for our soul to go up, we need to go through that same physical pain and suffering. We need to be knocked down. So the same way that Christ had to go through this humiliation, this pain and the suffering with the crown of thorns and the crucifix and being wrapped in purple and being mocked, he says, let me be wrapped in purple and let me be knocked down so that my soul can to heaven go. So in other words, he has now prepared, he has had this idea, he has understood that he needs to repent, that he needs to go through suffering, and he's now ready to move to the next part of his afterlife. So this is his final text, his final sermon for the Lord, where he's begging to please let this be so, where I have gone through all the suffering in order to come and meet you. Alright, that's it. We have neared the end of this mini study guide. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you found this helpful and that I managed to explain some of the more complicated ideas here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.